in different ways. So what we have here is a set of practices that I mentioned yesterday in the ceremony for the awards. Represents perhaps the largest collection of global city-led practices. That's a different point of origin for the generation of practices. There are other collections, if you will, but this is a city-generated, mayoral approved generation of practices, because as you all know who've seen the call for submissions, one of the criteria is that the submission has to be signed off at the mayoral level in every city that submits. So we have all these practices that are located in different countries, and as we've heard so much about the richness of the individual country experiences, city experiences, right, in many presentations over the last 2 days, what we are just beginning to learn about are the patterns across all of this work, and to try to analyze those patterns and look at the spread and the density and the lessons that we might learn from those is this exercise that we're going to tell you about a little bit more. So I'm going to turn this over now to Alessia to describe the process that we went through here very quickly.
Thank you. So, move on. Yeah. So good morning, everyone. So moving on, so building on the knowledge generated by the submissions over the years, ESTA, in collaboration with FAO and the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact, selected 50 promising submissions and decided to make them available to the public. So you can see them here. The selection was first based on the work of the evaluation committee. So we first selected the 16 practices that won the MPA editions for the years 2016 and 2017. And then we tried to achieve a geographical balance and an equal distribution across categories for the remaining 34 submissions. So you can see a sample of 6 briefs over there, and they have different colors according to the different categories they represent. So these briefs are available both on the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact website on a dedicated webpage and on the FAO Urban Food Action Platform. So I will just touch very briefly on the structure of the briefs. I have here one example from Dakar. So we have a text part where we briefly describe the practice with the context, very brief description, and the main lessons learned. There's usually also a graphic content. So here you can see a map. There's also a picture. There could be also an infographic. And what you can find at the bottom of the right page is the website with the main contacts. So if you want to learn more, if you want to have more information, if you want to contact anyone and get to learn more actually on the practice, you can just refer to that section over there. Whereas on the left page, we have a geographical reference of the practice. It's titled the submitting city, and a very interesting feature, which is the radar that I have highlighted here. So as we all know, cities have to choose a specific category when they submit their practice. But what we found out reading through all the submission is that the most promising practices actually have a very systemic integration. So in this case, for example, we have Dakar, and they presented this practice on table gardening. Which was mainly related to food production. But then, of course, it has a very systemic integration, as I said, so it has an impact on other categories, and there is a general integration across themes and topics. So in this case, it had a strong impact on food waste reduction, and on social and economic equity. So what we decided to do was actually to build this graph, so to combine all the secondary impacts from the 50 selected practices. And this was just to actually represent this very strong systemic integration across themes and topics in the governance of food systems. And this is one of the trends that actually emerged from our research, and that my colleague Andrea Calori is going to explain more in detail.
Thank you, Alessia. Thank you to everyone. So this was an analysis. This is an analysis based on the submission coming from the city. So it is not an academic research. So we analyzed something that was given in a voluntary way from the city. So this is our analysis and in some way some interpretation. So when we try to understand what is the relation between the Milan Pact category decided by one city to say, okay, this is my practice belonging to food production or food waste, but there are some impacts. It's our analysis. But it is interesting to understand that for each of us, each city, it's important to understand how to create a narrative and how to create an organization in a city to really understand what are the impacts of one actions, to shift from a project approach to a more integrated approach. Each of us tend to not only submit practices but also organize actions like projects because usually it is easier to control a project. And the issue is how to go in a more integrated approach because we are speaking about the food system. And then connecting this activity with the first part of the morning, it's important to understand the impact and how to measure the impact. So the indicators are interesting not only to monitor, but also to have a guideline to define and to have a different vision. I have to do something to multiply the impact, and I have to measure them. And from one side, there is the idea of how to go in a more integrated direction. On the other side, there is a complementary issue, which is how to use food as an eye to give a different sense to existing sectorial policies. Because for one side, we do need, I appreciated the description of the aid experience this morning, to say it's important to have a team. You have a team or you don't have a team. It was said by the aid experience. On the other side, we need to understand that in our experiences, it's important to understand who are the people who are able to use food as an entry point to work on economic development, welfare, etc. Coaching the existing policy officer, but also the politician, to use food as a way to improve their capability to work in existing sectorial policies. And then we tried to do another exercise, and in the report you have 4 maps. These are shown also outside in the posters. There are 4 maps according to 4 trends. We tried to collect small boxes of very, very short description of the case studies. In policy analysis, we used to say that it's important in a process to understand the breadth of the mayor, because there are not only formal regulation but also informal activities. You cannot find this kind of in-depth analysis in the report because we based our analysis on the submission, which are very synthetic. So we tried in a really synthetic way to put together this information to say, are there 4 main trends in the submission which go beyond the 6 category of the MUF, or maybe they cross them? And we can say that cities in the submission, we can say the cities use food sometimes to match urgent challenges, local challenges, maybe some economic crisis, for example. So food production is a way to feed people, etc. Or maybe something else. And then there is another interesting trend emerging, which is a growing interest for a different way of thinking the cities as an urban-rural continuum. So urban-rural linkages is something connected to food production and distribution, something immaterial, something connected to the economic flows, something connected to the environmental quality. So urban-rural linkages seems to be a key way to have an interpretation of what is happening in the Milan Pact cities. And this means also to have a different approaches to the food governance, which means from the case study from Baltimore, for example, which is a winner city of last year, they created an internal organization, a new internal organization in the municipality to work in an integrated way between the officer of the cities. Sometimes, instead, the governance is something connected to a different way to put together the stakeholder. Because if you want to work on health in the submission, it is not necessary to work with the hospital, with the people working with the traditional way to see health and nutrition, but also a more creative way to put together actors. So this is just to give you some flashes about how to read the existing very synthetic submission coming from the cities and to have more ideas for the future. And this is my last question. In our assembly box for the cities, we used to speak about infrastructure, houses, green area, and so on. And there are not a lot of people around also in the existing international processes, for example, in UN Habitat, but also in other places in the world, urban planners, they don't have usually the idea of using food as a way to see the cities, but food is an important material and immaterial infrastructure of the city, from a socio-economical point of view, environmental point of view, governance, and so on. So how to